just for reference, let's have a quick look at a couple of the instruments and the size of the rover. The rover itself is actually not that big. This is the duplicate of Opportunity and Spirit. Then you'll see the size of the wheels. This is important. We know the dimensions, and every time there's a wheel track on the ground, on the soil of Mars, we can use that as a sort of a yardstick. We can measure the size of that track and then determine the size of the rocks or the spherules that they're driving over. Very, very interesting. On the instrumentation arm itself, you will see a number of instruments, and you saw that just before, the rock abrasion tool. On the other side, they've got some instrumentation like this, the alpha particle X-ray spectrometer and the Mossbauer spectrometer. What these do is they analyze the materials in the soil and the rocks and tell us something about their composition. You'll notice that aluminum ring around it. There's another ring similar to that around the Mossbauer. You will see a print in the soil when the ring is pressed up against it to try and take some readings about what's in it. There are some areas that they have taken these readings, and it's very clear that it leaves a print behind that's very definite and very easy to see. And it tells you a lot about the cohesion of the soil, how well it sticks together or not. Sometimes they hit dry sand, sometimes they hit what appears to clearly to be mud. And on that note, I'd like to point out, I've claimed that there are geysers and present-day water flow on the planet. This should make it fairly clear. This is a picture from Sol 122, and it is clearly a geyser. Now, the dark strips are the wheel tracks of the rover. Why would the soil turn dark when you drive over it? Well, that's generally an indication that it's muddy or wet. And in that lower right corner above the white circle, that circle is the top of the instrument mast. The channel you see there is where water has gushed out of the ground, and it has blown back the spherules, the blue-gray looking things. By the way, this is a false color image. It's the closest we could get. They had the wrong spectrum to make the picture with. If you look at that channel, you can see the water has blown out of it and blown up a pile of spherules. That takes a force from within, blowing outward. You'll also see that the channels around it are very clear. The water has washed away anything that might have been there. Well, I mean, that's cool. That's one picture. Do we have any other evidence? Absolutely. We can see an area where one of the rocks has covered an area, and this is Sol 2482. This rock obviously has an area where the water has gushed out on the left. You can see the pattern in the sand. If you ever go to the beach and you see the water flowing and what it does, this is the same marking. And above it, you'll see an area the spherules clearly are muddy. You'll see clean ones and you'll see muddy ones. Wow, this is truly amazing, because it means that this mud had to be blown out of there recently. You notice that there is wind on Mars, and there is grit carried in the wind, and it would dry off or clean or move the soil. The fact that the sand and soil is so fresh looking, well, it's a clear indication that it was done recently. Okay, any more evidence that the water has been moving in the soil? The answer is yes. You can see that right here. And this is an area where the water has flowed, and you can see what looks like terraces in the mud. And those slots to the left are actually geysers. They have been active within recent times, within a few days or hours. So these are some of the things that I'm using to point out the fact that there is liquid water activity. There are geysers on the surface right now. As for fossils, I'll give you a really quick walkthrough. Here we have an image that shows a number of things. The upper left, you'll see what appears to be a piece of coral. The three following frames are all seashells. Some of those were found by the Spirit rover on the opposite side of the planet. In the center left image, you see some very strange but definite teardrop patterns. Now, in other parts of the spectrum, you can see parts of the rock that are dark in the optical spectrum, and you can verify that these are at 72-degree angles, a pentagon. The left of center image is the head of a trilobite. I mean, there's no other interpretation for it. It has the shape of the head, the eyes, the lobes, the ridges, and that's a pretty significant finding. Center right, we have what is clearly a sea urchin. You can see its beak and its shell without any question. And to the right of that, we have something that looks very similar to the sea gopher, a type of urchin on Earth. It's a sea biscuit type of organism, very similar to what we have on Earth. They're related to urchins. Um, Lower left, we have a sand dollar. I mean, in the stereo images, you can see it. The patterns are there, the shape is there. Next to it, that's a Sol 54 sea urchin. The rows of dots are perfect. Hexagonal pattern. These are the dots that anchored all the quills or spines of the urchin. To the right of that is another crinoid feature here. Um, it's got the branches, the segmentation, and beyond that, you have a thing that looks very much like a wheel with teeth or gear teeth. This is not a mechanical part. This is a seashell. We have very similar to these on Earth. So it's not surprising when you start finding all of these organisms. And let me give you a little close-up look at one of those seashells here. This is, on the left, a whelk shell on the Earth. And on the right on Mars, you have virtually the same thing. Um, it is not reasonable to think that a rock would just randomly assume the shape of a seashell and then be found in the bed of a dried ocean and not be a shell. That's kind of silly. And since I've got numerous different shell like objects in these dried ocean beds, and I've got other marine fossils, it's pretty safe to assume that we're looking at shells. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Um, Sea urchins. What's so unique about an urchin? Not that much, but there are certain patterns that show up on some of them that are outstanding. If you look to the right urchin, this is a fossil from Earth, and you see it has those linear patterns like stars all over it. The one on the left is on Mars, and by George, it's exactly the same patterns, right down to a round thing with 5 teeth in it in the middle, a round hole. That's pretty obvious. You'd have to be kind of blind not to see that. Let me take this one step farther. Here we have a crinoid on a rock on the left, found on Sol 314, if I'm not mistaken, by Spirit rover. And that's pretty close to a natural color image there. I had full spectrum to work with. But notice on the right, that is a crinoid specimen from the United Kingdom, and it is virtually identical. You've got the bulb or calyx of it, and then you've got the tentacles off to the right. I've turned it around to match the orientation, so it's much easier for the eye to see. But man, that thing on the left has the bulb and it has the segmented tentacles, and the one on the right does too. They're identical. Erosion doesn't just make fake fossils out of nowhere. Now I'm going to show you the one that really, really clinches it. On Sol 222, up inside Endurance Crater, Opportunity found what they call battered rocks. They were trying to figure out what these were, and they look like they've been dipped in batter. They're spherules before they've come out of their rock coating. And this is great because these have not been eroded or worn down. So if this rock splits open, you see a pristine raw spherule inside. And on the left, you'll see where it's split open. You see some funny geometry there. You see radial lines and circular lines. In the center, I have highlighted that in purple. That is the shell of an urchin, and in the center, that star, is the mouth of the urchin. Look to the right and compare that. This is absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, a marine animal fossil, a sea urchin, and it is on Mars. This is proof that there was aquatic life on Mars very similar to what we have on Earth. I mean, there's no more questions when you see this many examples of what are clearly fossils. So I would say at this point that it's rather disingenuous for NASA to ignore these findings and downplay them and claim they're not true. I mean, we can see with our own eyes, and the chemistry and the physics matches. Evolution is exactly the force we're seeing at work here. Numerous copies of the same patterns on different rocks. Erosion doesn't produce identical rocks. Erosion doesn't produce a big mark on a big rock and a little mark on a little rock that is exactly the same. So, for whatever their reasons are, they're claiming there is no life. These are not fossils. Nothing's been found, and nothing to see here. Let's move along. But it's very important for people to know that this is a lie. Mars does have life, and it certainly did have a very rich biosphere in the past. And, for all we know right now, a lot of that stuff could still be alive in caves and crevices underground, just waiting for their time to emerge when this present ice age comes to an end. Well, basically, this is what I wanted to share, and I think that all of you will enjoy knowing this is factual information, and you can go to the NASA site and find every single bit of it for yourself and verify it. I'm not asking you to believe anything. I want you to know. There's a huge difference. These are facts. They can be known. Well, we will be starting a new podcast for Talk Universe very shortly. Go to the site, talkuniverse.org. Have a look. We'll have our schedule up shortly. And go to our gallery of Mars fossils and Mars research at schultzlaboratories.com. That's a virtual reality site. You can go in and walk around just like you're in a video game or a virtual world and interact with all the exhibits. And we're going to be recruiting some people to help us doing the software development and design work very shortly so we can expand this thing until it covers a lot of different fields of science and technology. Anyway, thank you for listening. And I'm Charles Schultz with Talk Universe and Schultz Laboratories. And we will return with more content very soon.